Ladies and gentlemen, guys and goons, get ready for another episode of Reconnecting, our second episode. Thank you all for a great round of feedback and support on the first episode. So, because of that, we're going to stick with it. And plus, we're in quarantine. We have nothing better to do. We have an awesome show lined up today, and we will dive right into it because I can already tell that my co-hosts are squirming in their seats, and what better time to introduce them right now. So I am here. I'm Nick Mo or Chowda. And right below me in our Discord call is...
I am Ian Murphy, the pizza guy, screen name. And I am very excited today because I'm sure as it's about to be brought up, I'm ready to talk Valorant. So Marshall, you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm Marshall Brummel. I go by Hangry, and I guess we'll just get straight into how we feel about Valorant, right? Because Ian, you and I have gotten a chance to play it. So do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure thing. I will say initial impressions. I instantly knew I was going to be dumping stupid hours into this beta over quarantine. That was within the first hour of me playing the game, probably the first 10 minutes, the first competitive match I played. I knew I was ready to sink my teeth into it. I've picked up Omen, and I have just been having so much fun mind gaming people and just playing around with his mechanic. It feels so good, and the abilities feel like they fit really well into Valorant, maybe with the exception of some kits, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Raze has definitely been someone I've seen discussed in team chat. But first impressions, I am loving this game. Marshall, what are your first takes?
So I'll be honest, I played it and I was like, okay, this is a good game. But when I'm thinking about it, I was, of course, because how do you not compare it to Counter-Strike? My first thoughts were, would I rather play this or would I rather play Counter-Strike? And I would probably rather play this, but not by much.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what the weird it's the sounds of the game that do that to me. The sounds are not very rewarding, if that makes sense.
Are you talking about the sound effects themselves, like the sound of the op or like a kill, or are you talking more like the map sound?
It's more like the gun sounds. Everything feels weak. The headshot sound, great. The kill sound, cool. I like the little confirmation, but especially when I'm thinking about like the Phantom, I feel like I'm shooting peas. So I don't know. The sound's a little off. I definitely think like compared to like if you compare like the Phantom to like the AK or like the original AK sound in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, it's a big difference. So I've been kind of thrown off by that for a little while, but still giving it plenty of playing time. And I play Breach, so I found his kit very fun.
I'm sorry. Just to make sure I'm clear, the Phantom is isn't that supposed to be the M4 clone, and the Vandal is the AK? I just want to make sure we have those.
So I've been using the Phantom mostly, but when you compare the Vandal and the AK, my bad, I still think that the AK or even the original AK was like much more rewarding to fire.
I understand that. The thing is, in Counter-Strike, I was more apt to pick up an M4, but in Valorant, I've really found a home in the Vandal. So I think I might have just not been able to experience what you're talking about, but that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, and I use the A1S in Counter-Strike, so between that and the Phantom, it's not very different.
Okay, yeah.
So I think if I were to chime in here too, and I'll try and play the perspective of the outsider here, because as we are recording right now, I have my Valorant stream open. And I am still trying to get my key drop. So, I mean, that's a whole topic of debate. Well, actually, I'll put it to bed right now. Valorant drops are a thing. Everyone's waiting. Stream numbers are inflated because of people like me who are just waiting for their chance to play the game. But to comment on one thing, too, having played a lot more shooters than I usually do over this quarantine period, usually I'm more of a strategy game kind of person. So lots of Hearthstone, League of Legends, even like Civ 5 was my game back in the day. Having a rewarding sound ecosystem in any game, but especially shooters, is really important for like the immersion and satisfaction. Because I'll compare it to Rainbow Six, which has an incredible sound ecosystem. Every gun feels like it really belongs. It feels strong, and bullet impact feels great. And getting a kill, even with a bullet or two in that game, just feels incredibly satisfying. And so to like have that immersion be breaking because you're shooting peas out of an AK-47 is extremely disheartening. So I can totally see where that sentiment's coming from, Marshall.
One thing I will say that I have found that does feel very rewarding to counteract, I will say the gun sounds I think could definitely see some work, and that's something they could patch. I don't think we need to think that's definite. If that's, I say I definitely encourage people to let the company know that's how you feel about those gun sounds. Let's get those to a place where we're happy with them. But one thing I really like is there's like this melodic building when you get a kill. So if you get kills once, so you get your one kill, it's like duh, and then you get your second kill, it's like duh, and it just keeps rising. And so like if you get those 3 kills in a row, you just get to hear like the do re mi. It feels so good. It feels really good to get those kills.
And you talk about patching too. Riot's not shy about making changes to a game in beta. So we saw Legends of Runeterra has been announcing new cards, a whole bunch of cinematics. So things are subject to change. I mean, it's been in beta for a couple months now, but over the course of those months, I mean, it's like a Hearthstone expansion's worth of cards are being added, and the world feels very, very rich, which I think was one of the complaints with Legends of Runeterra early, is it just felt kind of barren, both in cards and concept. And they've really, really worked hard over these couple months while it was in beta to take some risks and keep adding and building on what was successful. So I have no doubt in my mind that Riot will take feedback and put it into the game, not only with balance, but like things like even sound design too.
Yeah, I mean, we've even last episode we even criticized Runeterra for the amount of cards and synergies that it had, and they've with the release and all their social media team doing like phenomenal like little videos and cinematics have shown us very wrong about that impression.
So as if I'm not going to play devil's advocate here, but I'm going to play outsider concern, I guess. Because again, I've been watching a lot of content from this game, right? I'm unable to get in. And here are the 2 concerns that came to forefront that I want to bounce off of you that not only I've heard, but I've heard other people have concerns about. One is the small pool of operators. So all things considered, I mean, when you're comparing it to like an Overwatch roster, for example, you have 10 playable agents, I believe they're called. And a lot of people are concerned about, not having many options. I mean, especially when you start figuring out the metagame, similar agents being played over and over again. So that's one thing for sure. And then second with that is I've heard people discuss that when you're kind of in like this pre-round limbo when you're buying and stuff like that, a lot of the map is available for you to push up to until those walls drop. So those are kind of the 2 concerns that have been floating around. I've seen them. I've not really sure what to think about them. They're a little bit of a turnoff for me right now, but what are you guys thinking about that? And I'll start off with Ian on that.
Well, if you remember the conversations I was having last week, my biggest worry is the game putting operators in place that do not balance out the gameplay. The biggest of that being, I think, Raze is the biggest talking point right now. I think they will be tweaking her abilities, but I would much rather see a limited champion pool at this point in the game, agent pool. I would much rather see that, just because it'll give people a chance to learn those characters and know what they're capable of and how they're going to affect the game. I think it's really important to understand which pieces of the puzzle your team has and how that's going to affect each site takeover. If you don't have a Viper ult, that changes the way you could capitalize on a site in a big pivotal round. That's Sage. Sage is on nearly every team comp I play with right now. She has a revive. She has a heal that is remarkably advantageous in early pistol rounds. Like when people don't have shields yet, that health is huge. And she just has that as part of her basic kit. That's not an ult, that's just a heal. I think there are going to be agents like Overwatch that we see almost every game. And I think as long as the other characters feel balanced around that, I'm okay with that. I think we just can't have too many of those that feel like, I don't want there to be any agents that feel like a waste to pick up. I don't want there to feel like, oh, I really like how Omen plays, but is he a waste? Should we have a Sage instead? Should we have a this person instead? That's really what worries me.
And before I pass over to Marshall, I will say that my one asterisk with my concern is that of those 10 agents, all of them feel very robust and unique. I mean, for example, I'm looking at it as a spectator. Phoenix looks incredibly cool to just even just spectate. And a lot of the characters' kits and abilities, like there's no overlapping. There's not two characters that will give you a shield or a heal as you move into combat, right? It just feels very robust and everything's very intentional. So at least with a small pool, there's a level of creativity and intentionality going into the design. But Marshall, I want to hear your thoughts on those two concerns I brought up.
So, man, I don't know where to start about this. I don't want to see lots of operators. I think when we talk about, you talked about all the characters feeling very robust, right? And part of that, I talked about sound earlier. Part of that robustness is like the voice lines, even that they have. And, you talked about liking Phoenix. It seems very clear that Riot also likes Phoenix, right?
Mhm.
And when you were just talking, it reminded me that these agents are almost like how Counter-Strike treats guns, right? Like guns are put on a pedestal in Counter-Strike, like the AWP is, like the AK is. But operators are going to be put on a pedestal in Valorant, right? Like Sage is, like Phoenix is, just because they're so fun to play and like such good character designs. So I think it would be a mistake to take the Overwatch approach and move to like having even 15 operators. A game like Siege has done very well at having lots of operators that are fairly balanced, and changing those operators to make them balanced. But I don't see Valorant overcoming the hurdle of having like 20 operators.
And
Well, let's also put that or concede that a little bit too, because Rainbow Six has that pool of operators that's pretty expansive, but of those operators, they're all situational, right? So
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
true.
you build your team comp around who you have, but also what map you're playing on, what type of game mode you're playing, and so like
But what's to
even
say that that couldn't happen with Valorant, right?
Oh, I am totally saying that's an option, but again, we'll need to see an expansion not only of the character roster, but in tandem with that, the situations in which they're engaging with each other. Because if
Yeah.
it's just a corridor and a gunfight, I mean, you're going to take the same operator every single time, right? But if you're
Yes.
playing a different type of objective or game mode, or even maps with different, types of verticality in a way, it's going to make certain operators stand out, certain agents stand out. So if Riot wants to take an approach, they're going to have to consider what's working well. For example, with Rainbow Six, where they're having different types of interactions between teams that make certain champions stand out.
One thing I would like to, I think this is a good time to bring this up. After playing this game, I've put, I don't know how many hours I've put into it. It's been, the ratio of my life playing Valorant has been sad and alarming right now. But that being said, it has reinforced my suspicion that this game does not feel like Overwatch at all. I think there is some flavor. The Sage's wall, that feels like Maze Wall, right? But what does it feel? Does it affect the match the way Maze Wall does? Absolutely not. It stays up way longer. The way I'm viewing that wall actively as the opponent is I'm viewing it in a way different way I'd ever have viewed May's wall if I were playing against a May in Overwatch. The abilities mean different things in the structure of the match that Valorant offers versus Overwatch. I think the flavor, I can definitely see some originality problems, and I think that has been a big complaint that I've heard rumblings of in the community. But in terms of how it affects gameplay, it's like having these abilities in a CSGO. This game is a tactical shooter. It's going to broaden the genre that CSGO exists in. And I think that's really how in the future, I have a suspicion that's the direction Riot's going to lean in. I'd be surprised if they started integrating more game modes that would make it feel like a different game than a tactical shooter. I could be wrong, and I'm interested to see if they do add those game modes, if they add weird things you'd never see CS add. But and I guess CS does add other game modes. To be fair, they have casual modes, but I wonder if they'd ever add any competitive alternate modes. I'm curious.
Before I send it over to Marshall, I want to get maybe a 15-second elaboration on what are you hearing in terms of grumblings about the originality concept. Is there anything specifically that stands out to you, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, one big thing, I've heard people just call Sage's Wall Mage Wall. I hear people call Omen Reaper all of the time. I hear characters just are flavored in a certain way that feel very reminiscent of a lot of character archetypes that we've seen in games like Overwatch, definitely TF2, games like that. I just see a lot of characters that feel like something we've seen recently.
Marshall, are you experiencing the same thing, or do you have other concerns or things that stand out as very positive to you?
No, I mean the originality, I hear it. I don't know if I particularly care. To me, it's all about like the gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
If the gameplay is better and I can trust the company and I want to like their product, it goes a long way. So I mean, it's sort of like it's no mistake that the operator is shortened to the op, which sounds a lot like the op, right? I mean, these things aren't mistakes. But it's also like, does that bother me? No. If I was a diehard CSGO fan who really didn't want Valorant to work out because I felt threatened by that community, I would probably not like it, but that's not the case.
But even if that's the case and you're being offended, I don't think Riot's trying to rob CSGO of its diehard fans. I think quite the opposite. I think that they're convinced that there are people that are going to stick with CSGO whether or not Valorant's the next big thing or not. But they're looking for the people who might be on the fence, who are looking for something familiar, but feels different, a new experience.
And I
agree.
I would like to add, not only am I thinking that Riot's thinking about, do we want to steal CSGO fans? I think the way they've set up this game is genius in that it feels like I can transfer between the two games anytime I would like to. I went back and played some Counter-Strike, and I felt better. I felt like I was better at Counter-Strike after dumping the hours into Valorant and just refining my aim skill. Like I've just been working that muscle, and I also felt more aggressive with my nades. I viewed them as if they were my abilities. I didn't have those two things separated in my mind. It felt like I was throwing out a smoke as if I were Omen, but it was a tactical smoke grenade. It felt very transferable, and I think it's nice to have, hey, CSGO is going to attract people back with their resources. They're going to make some big change. They're going to have some big tournament that will make people want to play Counter-Strike again. Let's build a game that is easy for them to come back to when we have that big event, when we have that big game mode release. Let's not say, hey, we need to steal the market here. Let's say, let's turn those players into people that can play two games at once instead of dedicate their entire lives to one experience and sink those 4,000 hours into Counter-Strike that people sink into it.
So you're saying, and if I'm hearing you right, that the initial claim that Valorant is the CSGO killer is actually quite the opposite, where the existence of Valorant might be better for the tactical shooter community as a whole.
Probably more of the CSGO brother.
Yeah, CSGO brother. I like that. I think it's not the CSGO killer. Is it going to be a Cain and Abel situation? I don't think so. I think the two brothers can live in harmony.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of move on to something that we alluded to briefly, but I also want to give the opportunity for maybe some closing remarks. So I'll leave 30 seconds before we move off of first impressions to say that in terms of very micro level things, because I'm a little picky when it comes to my games, I love a good user experience. Again, I've only been spectating, so I'll say I haven't had a feel for the game in terms of mechanics, but at least from a spectator standpoint, I love the way the minimap is structured, how you can see vision limitations for all your teammates, how it moves. I've seen even people have a rotating mini map, so wherever way you're looking is like upwards. or like have it rotate when you move around. So I thought that was cool. And even small things like when you're spectating and you switch between operators on your team, there's a small bit of motion blur as if you're whipping to their perspective. And those little things are what, man, it's just Riot shows that they really, really care about their product. And those small details like that do stand out, at least to me, as opposed to, like when you're playing other games, you're clicking through perspectives as your other team's still competing. You're just, jump cutting to other people. It's those small things.
Their jump cuts are very 2012.
It's just oh my god, but I really am finding myself appreciating those smaller details that Riot obviously has taken care of. But I've probably talked for longer than 30 seconds, but 30 seconds to Ian, then Marshall, about some closing thoughts or things you want to touch on before we move on.
I nodded a lot during what you were saying there, and I want to add a few of my own things. Here are some things that I would be surprised if Counter-Strike didn't add after this. Valorant adds your minimum amount of money you'll have next round with your current buy. That's incredible. Knowing that is huge, and I will be surprised if CSGO doesn't add that number somewhere in their interface. Selling after you've bought incorrectly is such an ability. The amount of rounds I've spent in Counter-Strike where someone buys and you just hear the one guy sigh and go, I guess we all have to buy, gone. You don't need to do that anymore. That's just huge, and I think Counter-Strike is going to be forced to respond in some of those very basic ways. Marshall?
Yeah, so I'm just going to reiterate Valorant is what we said about Valorant being the CSGO brother. And I think that while these two companies are competing, while these two companies are competing, it's the viewers that win.